All right, welcome back to another episode of the Demand Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Bland, co-founder of Omni Lab, and today I'm joined by Kate Terry, who is the head of demand gen at Turtl. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's great to be here, and really excited to get into a good discussion today.
Awesome. Well, I know you and I have talked a little bit back, just on LinkedIn and whatnot. It's kind of how we got in touch and whatnot. And I did a little bit of research. I won't say I'm an expert in Turtl, but I think for a little bit of context, my understanding is you guys kind of have made PDFs the villain. You guys are about interactive content and giving them a platform to build that content. But that's my interpretation of it from looking at your website. But tell me a little bit more about, what you guys are doing right now and kind of what you're after. And then it'd be interesting to ultimately who's the audience for this, like who you guys marketing to.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. So you picked up on our one of our stickiest campaigns, I would say, was Kill the PDF. And that's what people often remember, even if it's not a campaign that we've run in quite a while. It is a good campaign. So, Turtl is a software platform. It's a content platform. And at the core of it, it's a format, right? So it's a better digital format where you can create interactive content, you can host it and update it on the fly. And if you think about content that would otherwise be published in PDF, that you would have to go through kind of a typical production cycle, everything from writing to then design to publishing it. And if you have to update it, you go through all that again. This is really looking at how can we turn that into something digital, evergreen, and more interactive as well, where you can get analytics back and then kind of push those and integrate them into your database. So you're getting that insight as people engage with your content, which you can't get from a PDF. So that's kind of the heart of it. And that's where it started, was like a better digital format. It gets more attention, your campaigns perform better. From that, we realized that there's a lot of opportunity with that surrounding platform to build out integrations, to build out ways that you can get more impact out of your content. Not only from a better format, but also in driving more automation. So the direction we've been going in more recently is better ways to automate content. One of the key ways that we've been looking at that is personalized content. So we've got all this great data on how people engage, and then we have a bunch of data, let's say from your customer data platform or from your CRM, on everything else, right? There's firmographic data, other kind of marketing data that you have, other behavioral data. You can use all that data to push it into Turtl, personalize the content that you send them. Maybe it's pulling a specific page in because you can see that they're from this industry. Maybe it's, including their account name on the cover, or pulling in something that is interesting to them because you've got that kind of tagged, based on their engagement with another piece of content. Like, there's endless possibilities really, but ideally you get into this thing where you're setting up really automated workflows that segment people more effectively, send them the right piece of content that's really personalized, and get that engagement and kind of push it back into your system to learn a little bit more. So that's what's really exciting to me as a demand marketer, and kind of, what we've been doing more recently at Turtl.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So again, the way that I would use it is if we had a traditional like ebook or guide that was a PDF, what I could do is I could take that PDF or guide, because the content I have to still provide, I think, to the platform, right? You guys are providing the platform for me to insert that content and then make it more dynamic, interactive. So then what happens then is the flow, like say I'm running a LinkedIn campaign and I want to distribute this guide out, et cetera, but I want to use Turtl to do it. Does that mean that instead of going to get the PDF directly via either email or directly from the channel itself, that I'm going to land into Turtl's platform that I'm sure is branded and everything like that, and then the person consumes it there? Or how does it work in terms of that? Curious.
Yeah. So it's basically you own your Turtl format, right? So it would be all in your brand. It's hosted as kind of a live URL. So every account has their own kind of version of it, and it's in a different brand specific to you. And it's like it's a live URL, right? So you can use it in any way that you would use the URL. Sometimes with a campaign, you would create that piece of content. You can convert a PDF, but it's not just hosting a PDF. You would actually create it kind of natively in Turtl. You would then promote it through different channels, whether that's kind of embedded on your website, or whether it's
Mm-hmm.
through, lead gen, you could still kind of have a lead form that leads into a Turtle doc, or you can
Mm-hmm.
send people directly to it. It really depends on the channel, right, and how you want to use it. But
Makes sense.
basically, it's a live URL. You can embed it in emails. It's a
Yeah,
very visual URL as well. But yeah, it's kind of just the
I
uses
like it.
are endless.
No, I like it. I think in the world of like everything needing to be more personalized right now, I think this is a perfect solution for that because everyone's
Mm-hmm.
looking to say, all right, I've got my ICP, I've got a couple of different segments I want to go after, but we really need content that's going to ultimately resonate with those specific groups. So if they can get a better
Yeah.
way to actually doing that and making sure the content's actually going to resonate and hit, ultimately it's going to drive more engagement, more consumption of the content, and then hopefully whether it's inbound demo requests or trials or whatever the goal is for the campaign, it drives more of that versus we've got, hey, let's just throw it out to everyone. It's a guide. It doesn't really matter. Let's not personalize and see what happens. And then a lot of times it's like, well, hey, like what's wrong with advertising or what's wrong with whatever channel we're distributing ad on? And it's not the channel. It's a lot of times the content and the way that the
Yeah.
content's been delivered. So I think like that's the big thing, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I would add into that timing, right? Like everyone's on a
Hmm.
slightly different time frame. Not everyone is ready to read something at a given
Oh,
time.
completely.
And if you do that more mass approach, um, especially if you are a little bit more resource strapped in a smaller team, you might be taking that approach like, okay, we'll just send everything out as a big campaign, but that's going to hit a certain percentage of people at the right time. So if you've got this
Yeah.
idea of, better triggers, set up and more automation, then you just catch people at the right time more often.
Yeah, this kind of leads into something too that I think is a really big topic, and I know that you guys do a little bit of it. I didn't do a massive deep dive. Probably should have spent even a little more time, but I know you guys do a little bit of gated content, some lead gen forms and stuff like that on LinkedIn. I think if you're on LinkedIn enough, which I know you are, you see the constant discussions of gated versus ungated. What should we be doing, and then what are the flows after? I think is also the really big important thing too, right? Because there's lots of people that are saying like, hey, these are leads immediately, and let's have a rep immediately go after with a sequence and follow up with them and try to convert them. And then there's a group of people that are saying, hey, listen, no, like these really aren't sales ready. There's not intent. It's a signal. Yes, it's a signal, and they're definitely responding to it. But we really need to nurture them over time. And I'm kind of curious, like more your perspective on like gated versus ungated, and then if there's kind of a tie-in to Turtl as well, I would imagine that's kind of interesting to maybe talk about that for a second.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it is a really interesting topic. So the way that we think about gating is there is a place for gates, right? Like there's a
Yeah.
place where you want to, ideally grab people's emails so you can keep communicating with them. But is that place right away? And I think a lot of people go straight into it, just dive right in and kind of like, okay, we're going to run a great campaign. It teases value, and then we're going to grab your email.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that a better way to do that is to provide a lot of value up front and then ask for that gate. So the way that we approach it within Turtl is you can do these gates midway through the content. You can serve up a piece
Hmm.
of content, provide quite a bit of value in the early chapters, enough to where people decide whether they want to continue on or not.
Hmm.
And then you can put
Interesting.
that gate midway through. It just kind of pops up and says, hey, do you want to
Hmm.
continue reading? And then you give them that choice. Or even better,
Hmm.
and actually the approach we take more often is make it a soft gate that pops up midway through, offering additional value, whether it's a
Hmm.
related lead magnet or a related
Mm-hmm.
newsletter, something else that kind of builds on what they're already reading and interested in, and kind of pops
Mm-hmm.
up, gives them the choice. They can dismiss it if they want to and kind of carry on through the document, and kind
Yeah.
of give them that choice again once they get to the end. But basically, like thinking of gates as added value is the way that we kind of try to approach it. It's the same with our blog. If we point people to the blog, we want to give
Right.
value upfront and get them interested, and then link into a lead magnet or another piece of like a longer form piece of Turtl content
Mm-hmm.
that builds on the topic and keeps people reading. And we see a lot more conversion from that than if we, for instance, do that right upfront gate. We do a little bit of that still,
Hmm.
depending on the audience, and kind of experimenting with different things to see what works still.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of approach of value first and then a gate is more so the way to go.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. I think that gating does have a place. I think in early stage companies, at least what we've seen, is that a lot of times the buyers don't have a lot of trust with that brand. So when you're coming out and trying to immediately gate, many times there's not enough built up trust with that brand to even bother filling out the form. And so sometimes in those early stage companies, what we do is, focus on instead delivering value ahead of time, like you just said, right? So it might be an ungated blog or some ungated content, and start, releasing some of that out, whether again, organic, whether through a paid channel, et cetera. And then over time, as those people get more familiar with your brand, whether it's through a retargeting campaign or other, then you can start potentially offering up some gated content, which is a little bit more unique, et cetera. Something that's not just a regurgitation of what everyone else is saying, but something where you've got true perspective, maybe some quantitative data, thinking about the way Gong does it. But for example, Gong early on didn't do a lot of gating, but now they do. A lot of their assets are actually gated, but that's because Gong has a brand now. People know them, they trust them a little bit more. So I think it's about, to your point, and just adding to it is, you got to give a little bit of value in the beginning, right? And then as trust is built, then you could potentially have other little assets that are part of that experience that then people, you could say, hey, if you want to, some more information about XYZ thing, fill out your information here. Right.
Yeah, exactly right. I really like the way that Gong approaches it. They've got their own proprietary data, and it's really interesting.
Yeah,
a lot of
awesome.
it they do provide up front, but then they always kind of link into something else where you can keep learning. And,
right.
That can happen pretty quickly. Like you could go through that whole journey in the same session where you want to keep kind of learning more and you keep going, or, maybe it happens over a longer time. But I like their approach.
And I guess in terms of I think the big thing too is the follow up. And I think this is where so many people have at least felt burned on the buyer side from ebooks and guides. It's certainly been the conversation where, you just were interested in reading the piece of content, but then you had someone on the sales team that was passed over and that was immediately turned into MQL, and you were just not interested. And a lot of times we see the conversion rates on these not very high. Now, I won't say this is always the case, right? I've actually seen some companies where they're actually driving fairly substantial conversion rates off of ebooks, but I think that that's faded off over the years where things were a lot more productive. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I mean, do you guys, and what does the flow look like? I mean, after someone starts consuming that content, they fill out their information. What typically takes place after that?
Yeah, I mean, we don't necessarily see that as a sales ready lead immediately. Like you said, people, if they just start to engage with an ebook, it really doesn't say anything about how ready they are or interested they are in buying something. So we would definitely take the approach of a softer follow-up where we start to provide additional content in that same vein via email and maybe via different display ads as well, and kind of a retargeting campaign. And start to understand them a little bit better, learn a little bit more about them. So our triggers that would trigger sending them over to the SDR or to the sales team would be more like, ideally, we provide enough educational content and kind of bring them on that journey long enough to where they would raise their hands. And we're looking for kind of hand raising actions where they, come into our website. We try and push people to learn more about us, and ideally go to our website, do some research, raise their hand. That's kind of our holy grail of the journey and what that would look like. Of course, we do have an awesome, yeah.
No, I think you nailed it. I think that's exactly, I mean, I'm not personally, the way that we think about it, I'm not opposed to giving a nudge at certain points of the journey, just like, reaching out strategically whether you're leveraging, say, intent-based data, and then you reach out strategically with personalization on an outbound email or whatever the channel is. Not opposed to the nudge. I think in a lot of cases, especially in enterprise motions, that nudge is important. You're not always going to have everyone raise their hand and come in to your website, but ultimately, I think what you said is great, and I totally agree that there needs to be a conscious understanding that these people are interested in reading your content. It is a signal, and clearly they're interested in whatever you're trying to talk about. But it doesn't mean that they want to talk to sales. And listen, these people are smart, right? Like if they want to talk to sales, you've got CTAs all over your website that say, request a demo, talk to us here, or whatever it may be. So, I think to your point, wait until they're ready, wait until you've given enough value, and ultimately, that they're going to come in when they're good and ready.
Yeah, I totally agree. But I would also add, and kind of my next thing is we do have an outbound sales team, right? We have a lot of SDRs who are awesome. They do take the approach of going in to provide value and learn more. Like they're not going in with like a hard sell immediately. They're going in based on these signals that they see. And it's more like they wouldn't necessarily go in and see that list of ebook downloads as a way as a signal for them to go in. They're looking for things further down the funnel to say whether it's maybe, visiting or pricing or product pages on the website, or, maybe we have some intent signals from their account that we can see. So we kind of see that they're a little bit further down, and we would kind of share that with the SDR team. So they, on the enterprise side, take a more account-based approach and do kind of go out with an outbound motion. We as a team support them with the emails that they send as well to make sure that our content is all lined up. So they would be sending additional content in that same vein where it continues to provide value around the same things that we've found out that they're interested in from that early stage. So it helps to connect up that journey. And to your point, I definitely see on the enterprise side in particular, you need both. You need your people who are going to come in, and then, you have to recognize, especially if you want to do kind of hit your really high growth targets, you need to recognize that you should ideally have both of those motions going at once, where you've got a solid outbound
100%.
team and you've got inbound leads coming in. So that's what we take. And, it's maybe a cop-out answer, but we kind of like try to do both things and recognize who's going to come into the website, who the SDR team should be going after, and, kind of try and nurture people with that, both of those channel or funnels in mind, I guess.
Yeah. No, I think you do need to do both. I mean, clearly, I think that there's definitely a place for both, and again, especially in enterprise motions. But some people, I mean, ideally, what we want to see is that marketing is able to produce more inbound source leads, more marketing source pipeline, more marketing source revenue. So over time, if we can see that increasing, then I think marketing is really doing a good job of educating their buyer, and especially when the sales team's on the calls, and maybe whether you guys use a recorded software at all and you listen to those calls, you're like, hey, I read this really great piece of content, or hey, like you guys have just been putting out awesome stuff, like your newsletter, or whatever the the stuff is. That's why I came in, and sales is going to be like, wow, this is like easy. I mean, these guys are really like, they know what we do. They know what we do, and they know we're against PDFs, right? They remember that campaign, and that's why they came back in to see us. And I think that's what every sales team wants, because then that makes the salesperson's job a whole lot easier, where they can say, great, now I've got a buyer that's already very like well understood of what we do, our value prop, and what we're trying to accomplish. Now I just need to kind of answer a few little questions and move it down the line. And I think that's ultimately the dream, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to move into one other thing. I think this is interesting. We work with a lot of C to Series B companies, and I think that there's so much pressure in this stage of company. I don't know if you'd agree, but especially as soon as you start taking outside money, it becomes very difficult sometimes to stay long-term focused on running other types of campaigns, like brand marketing campaigns and other campaigns that are not necessarily lead gen or in capture channels. And it's a very difficult balance, I think, especially in those early stage companies, when still you might not have a ton of content. You're still developing what your strategy is. Maybe you're not quite at product market fit, et cetera, but ultimately you still have a revenue target, you still have a pipeline target, and those things need to be met. So I'm curious, like, especially whether you kind of think about it in the lens of short-term marketing versus more lead gen, or more long-term marketing and brand marketing. How do you think about that? And like, do you also agree that it's very challenging, I guess, in this, it's kind of like Series A, high pressure, we got to get to 10 million to raise the next round, et cetera?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a difficult balance to strike. And, I think as marketers, our job is to keep the long-term view in mind, because the business might push more for that short-term view, but in the long run, and maybe even in the short run, if you miss out on that long-term view, you're not really going to get to where you want to be for that next stage of growth, right? So we do always have to keep that in mind, even when the pressure is there to focus more on the short term. I would say if you're maybe new into your role, a new marketing leader, or you are kind of recently tasked with building more pipeline, that's the thing to focus on first. And as much as you can get that into a position where people are comfortable with the amount of leads coming in, with the quality of leads coming in, that's the thing to address first. So if you had to kind of prioritize either of those things within a revenue focused business, I think that's the thing that you have to have in place. Otherwise, no one's going to trust you and give you that extra budget for the brand marketing, even though you as a team might really recognize that that's important. I do think as part of that, one of the things that you can do is help people to understand what the bigger picture looks like, and how people go from just hearing about your brand down to, entering into the sales funnel. So if you can build as much as possible a picture of like a predictable pipeline starting from that early engagement stage all the way through, that helps to support some of the additional more brand focused marketing that you want to do. So one of the things that we look at is, well, what does it really mean if someone engages with a Turtl doc at an early stage? Let's say it's a top of funnel piece of content. It's about, a thought leadership topic. We can see that, X amount of people have read it for 2 minutes. Does that tell us anything about how many of those people will then go on to, want to buy from us later? And often we can actually create some kind of funnel to where those metrics become more meaningful to the leadership team. That just helps us to build out the bigger picture. But yeah, at the end of the day, we're really focused on, well, what does that all mean when it translates to sales? I think metrics really help with that.
Yeah. Well, going back to it, you said metrics, so just to hit on that. So, well, I guess maybe let me actually back up and we change course. In terms of the split, how do you guys look at it today? How do you split budget between those two? Is it a clear hey, let's dedicate 40% of our budget to brand marketing activities and let's dedicate another 60 over here to lead gen activities? Do you guys think about it that way, or what should people be doing for a lot of Series A companies that might be in the same situation? What would you say to that, or anything that you guys are doing specifically there?
Yeah, in terms of advertising, I think it probably hits somewhere around that split. We have a lot of our budget, though, in different categories like technology. Not all of it is split in that way, but I think when it comes to advertising, that's probably about it, kind of that 40-60, which I think is sort of a recognized number in terms of how you would split it. But again, I think always trying to think about what happens to those same people who are in that early stage campaign and how does that actually reflect further down the funnel as much as possible.
Yeah, I just think, it's difficult. I think that's usually the split that we see is around 40, 60, 40% brands, sometimes more like a 50-50 split even. I think there's been a lot of surveys around, something around that. Ultimately becomes down and important and just deciding how do you want to grow as a business and where are you in terms of maturity and whatnot. But I think that those campaigns are so critical to making sure that we're ultimately building more brand awareness around what we're doing, not having to gate every single asset, right? But still doing what we just said before, delivering a little more value up front, whether that's short clips of a podcast or a webinar, a live Q&A that you did, whether that's a blog that's answering top questions, desires, pains, wants, etc. Making sure that that's happening over time and not saying, hey, let's look at the channel and every time we put $1 in, we've got to get $1 out. Or if it's organic, not saying everything on our website is all going to be gated, making sure that there's still a healthy balance between the two. So, I think that those things are important, but I think the measuring of success is also difficult too, don't you think? When you're looking at brand marketing things like that, and you're not necessarily being able to go in and tell, let's use a paid example. You're not necessarily able to go in and say, yeah, we ran this ungated blog and yeah, we didn't get a lot of leads particularly from it. It's not as easy to track the way that we're running that campaign. How do you sell that campaign, or is it something that you feel like you need to sell internally to get support to do that? Because I think the metrics are really important on those campaigns in specific. Lead gen, I think, is very obvious the way that works if you're running it from a performance marketing perspective. But how do you think about brand marketing and the metrics you should be measuring?
Yeah, well, we do have quite a big focus on content. And as I said, we do try and provide quite a bit of that value in that content in an ungated way. So we look at things like follower growth, at, blog traffic, at direct kind of hits to our website and things like that, more so internally as a marketing team to understand the success. But I think in terms of how you then connect that up to what the business wants to see, one of the big things that we try to do is track as much as possible into our CRM so that we can see who specifically, like which accounts are engaged with that piece of content, whether it's a blog or a Turtl doc, which people ideally are engaged with that. So even if they don't necessarily fill in their email, we're still ideally able to kind of track them. It's not like everyone, you can't track everyone, right? Because if they've never filled in their email, we might not be able to, but as much as possible, we try and give that view to the sales team so they have an understanding that not only is this content supporting just us being out in the world and being more well known, but actually your specific accounts here are engaged with this piece of content, or these specific people who you want to talk to at some point are engaged with this content. So I think it's just as much as possible tracking that back in. And again, then using all of that data that you have to provide a more personalized follow-up for that person. So we had a campaign that we were running recently where we had an ungated piece of content around how you can bring psychology into your writing, and just
Love it.
completely kind of high, top of funnel, educational, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And we had someone read that content, and I actually got an email on LinkedIn. I got a
Yeah,
LinkedIn message, and they were like,
totally.
"Hey, how did you do this? It was really cool. I read this piece of content, and then a few minutes later, I got a follow-up email that was really relevant, and I had never entered
Yep.
my email. Like, how did you do that?" And I was like, "Well, I'm really glad you asked. We have tracking
There
that
you
we can
go.
do with Turtl, and it was perfect. But I think as much as possible to kind of try and track things and then
Yeah.
provide that follow-up that's really personalized. People are really impressed by that, and for us, it kind of got them to stand up and take notice.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. I mean, makes perfect sense. I mean, I think that the metrics, that's really cool that you guys can do that in your own software. One, I think that really helps. I think that the metrics that a lot of times we'll look at is, what was the consumption of that content? How long did they stay on that page consuming that content, and compare that a lot of times to gated content to see what the consumption difference is. And a lot of times we'll see that the difference in consumption is actually very much in favor of ungated type of content, like you were saying. So I imagine you guys see that as well. When you've got a piece of content where it's open, people can immediately start getting access to it, interacting with that content. And then from there, to your point, then you might have other interactions where you kind of pull them in differently. So I think that's really interesting. But I wanted to, I guess, to shift the conversation kind of in a little bit of direction. Ultimately, when you think about reporting up, the kind of, again, getting into metrics, I think this is always the most important thing, and how marketing, what the success metric of marketing is. When you report up metrics to your CMO or CEO, what are those metrics that you guys are reporting up, and how ultimately is marketing measured? Is it on leads? Is it on pipeline? Is it on revenues? A little bit of the all. Like, what's the ultimate metric that you've got to report up to management to?
Yeah, so it's been changing in our business pretty recently, actually. Historically, it was very much we solely focused on enterprise, and it was that MQL target, right? Where we had targets
Mm-hmm.
around how many people are we sending into our SDR team. More recently, as I said, we've always paid attention to the people coming in inbound, but I think more recently there's a real drive to push that forward, to scale that, and that's ultimately what we want to be measured on, right? Through both of those things,
Mm-hmm.
though, it's more about what happens next. So what's the quality? So we're looking at the pipeline that it generates through either leads that we send through to the SDR team, or through our high intent leads that come in through hand raising actions.
Mm-hmm.
And we're looking at velocity, how quickly those close, and how many of those close, right? So just percentages, and
Yeah.
then kind of the overall pipeline that we're growing. That's kind of like the end all be all metric that the business cares about, that we care about, that we're kind of trying to make sure we see growth in. And beyond that, like I mentioned, we want to give enough attention to earlier stage activities. So we have the view of the funnel that we're reporting on. How many people are in the top of funnel? How many people are in the middle? How many people are at the bottom? That's just based on those different triggers that we see, that kind of, what behavior do we see as middle of funnel? How many people are taking those behaviors? How many people are then going on to actually have a conversation with us? And at the
Mm-hmm.
top of funnel, it is things like content engagement, as you said, looking at the time spent on content as opposed to just, like hits. And looking
Mm-hmm.
at the people, how many people do we have in our database who are engaged with our content in particular? That's what
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the leadership team wants to see. They want to see that kind of momentum, how people
Right.
are moving through the funnel. So as much
Yeah.
as possible, we track those, or we link those early stage metrics to people in our database. And things like follower growth on LinkedIn as well is super important to us.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that the business cares about as well, because that shows that we are becoming a kind of thought leader in our own right, and people are following us
Mm-hmm.
because they want to hear more from us. So I think luckily I'm in a fortunate position where the leadership team does care about some of those things. They care about the brand. They care about, becoming well known. We're a content platform. We're marketing to marketers and
Yep.
salespeople. So it is very much a good environment for that. But still, we have to prove
Yeah.
out how that looks against our funnel.
Got it. So what I heard is inbound pipelines, so marketing source pipelines, key thing. Obviously, inbound demo requests before that, so the hand raisers. and then clearly closed revenue that's coming from marketing. Obviously, there's some other metrics, like you mentioned, funnel metrics. So you're looking at the efficiency of the funnel. How quickly are things moving? Are we driving the right types of leads into the funnel? And if you are and you're doing a good job of marketing, those should move at an effective rate. Clearly, it's still a team job, though, right? Sales still needs to do their part, move them through the funnel, et cetera. So marketing can only do so much there. But I think that's important. But you guys look at it always on the aggregate level, because I think one of the challenges that a lot of marketers get put into is what channel is working, and everyone wants to point at the specific channel, whether it's email, whether it's paid ads, whether it's organic content on the website, or a specific even piece of content. They want to point and say, hey, this is what led to this revenue. But I think we all know that in a B2B buying journey, it's not as easy as just saying this channel did it all, right? I mean, there's multiple different touch points. They're interacting with your blog, a podcast, they're on social media, they might have saw an ad, then they got an email from an SDR, et cetera. But I think there's still that attention for a lot of companies on making sure, hey, is this channel performant for us? And if it's not, then we need to either stop using that channel. And especially this happens in brand marketing campaigns too, right? Where depending on your thoughts on attribution and how the CEO or CMO think about it, it's saying, all right, well, are we looking at every channel to be a performance marketing channel for us? Are we looking at LinkedIn, for Facebook, for all these channels, or even email to give us, leads right out of it? Or are we okay with the idea that we need to look at the aggregate funnel and say, how many overall inbound demo requests are we overall driving more, and we're hitting our goals? And does it really matter then which channel is actually doing it? But I'm curious to your thoughts on that, because I think it is challenging, and a lot of people get that question, right? As a marketer, you're saying, well, they might say, hey, Kate, so what channels are best for us? Where should we spend more money? Where should we invest? I'm curious, how do you handle that question, or is attribution channel by channel less a thing for you all, and not something that you guys worry about too much?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting conversation. So it is important to us. I think what you said is exactly right. You have to be really clear about what your goals are for each channel and what you want to get out of it.
Yep.
That tells you how successful it is, right? So once you know that, you can easily optimize using the channel performance metrics to understand how to make it better, how to make it more effective. But if you have a performance, goal, and you're actually growing followers on LinkedIn, is that going to be connected up? So you really have to be clear on what you hope to get out of that channel. So for us, we do look at channel performance, but it's looking at it through the view of, okay, we want to grow our followers on LinkedIn. That's the main thing we're optimizing for. So let's, go all in on that and see what we can do. Or we want to bring leads into our database, or we want to we've got this list, we want to bring leads in. So let's really optimize for that. So we're doing a little bit less of that sort of like full channel overview and like seeing, okay, of all, because I think every channel can work. It's more about what you want to do with it. And as a small team, we're really focused in on, just the channels that are most effective, and that, it links back to what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, no, agreed. I mean, I think clearly you need to be tracking channel by channel, but I think what you said is really smart. It's about identifying the metrics that you want to track per each channel. So sometimes it's not always going to be a lead goal in that channel. You might have other goals. And to your point, maybe it's a follower goal, maybe it's the consumption of that content and getting people to that page, and so they consume it, whether it's ungated or gated. Whatever the goal is, align on that goal and make sure that everyone realizes that not everything's a performance marketing channel. Because I think that we work with a lot of brands, and I think we set very clear expectations all the time to make sure that, hey, ultimately the way we need to look at this is not only by how many leads did we get out of this channel. That's a lot of times not the way it's going to work, especially with brand marketing campaigns. So I think aligning on that early is so important, to your point, and then ultimately making sure that you've got buy-in all the way at the top. And is that conversation for you, is that a tougher one? I mean, is your CEO, I don't want to call him or her out too much, but kind of get marketing and understand, the way things work? It sounds like you were saying yes in general, that you don't have to fight those same battles that a lot of marketers have, where it's like, it's always dollars in, dollars out. Someone that like really understands, like, hey, sometimes this is going to take a little bit of time. We're not always going to be able to, get all the leads out of these channels as we want.
Yeah, thankfully our CEO does really get marketing and is someone who cares a lot about some of these different ways that we can show success as a marketing team. So that's great. We're in a great position there. I will say that we are still a very sales and revenue focused organization. So we
Totally.
do still always try and link it back to that. And it is sometimes more difficult to say, what does it mean if we have website traffic, or what does it mean if we have, some engagement? More recently, I think we've been able to show what that actually means, and
Right.
to show that it does contribute to growth of the business.
Yep.
But I recognize the struggle, I guess, that is to say,
It's
even in
tough.
a sympathetic
It's tough.
environment, it is tough.
No, I don't think there's a perfect answer. I mean, I talk to marketers all the time, and like this is one of the number one issues is ultimately, hey, everyone's getting, pinned to the wall against channel by channel, metrics. But then at the same time, if you do that, then you've got to run different types of campaigns and different tactics in there, which is why you see 90, 85% of campaigns, at least again speaking on the paid perspective, are gated in performance marketing. It's lead gen forms and whatnot. So you see a majority of that, and why? It's just driven by we need to get a certain cost per lead out of the channel. We need a certain amount of email addresses, and that's the way it needs to be. So I think that it's just such a tough thing. So it sounds like you're in a great position where you can have a little bit of mix of the both, and not everything has to be focused on that, where you can still deliver a lot of value up front and use the channel a little bit more the way it was meant to be used. And then ultimately
Yeah.
that drives more inbound demos for you guys.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what you measure is what you'll end up improving on. And if you are
Exactly.
really narrow in your mindset of, well, it always has to
Totally.
drive leads, and that's why at Turtl, we're trying to give marketers access to different types of metrics that say something about the impact of their content, whether it's linking it up to someone in your CRM, or whether it's saying how long they actually read. It's just more ammunition to say, this is important and here's why. You can see the difference, and you can then start to
Yep.
optimize for that, because those things do matter, and that's what actually drives performance. But marketing attribution doesn't always tell that whole story.
100%. 100%. Well, cool. Well, let's wrap up. I guess any questions you have for me just on demand gen, anything that you'd like to kind of know more about?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested. You talk to a lot of demand marketers, obviously. I'd be interested if you see any trends for the year ahead, anything that's changing, or I guess just what you see on the horizon for the year.
Yeah, so I think the couple of big things that I see are one, and I think this movement's been happening over the last couple of years, but I think there's going to be the measure of success is going to change for a lot of marketing teams, where it's less about MQLs and leads and more about pipeline. So I think that's going to be a challenge for a lot of marketers that were once tasked with running a lot of programs and tactics to drive, leads all through the channel, like we were just talking about now. So I think that measure of success is going to change more. I think in addition to that, we also are probably going to see comp plans change accordingly to that as well. So not only making sure that, it's just the measure of success, but the compensation of a marketer is likely going to be affected. I've already seen that happen through a variety of different B2B SaaS companies. So I think that's going to be a big thing. You're going to see, I think, an increasing amount of ungated content and brand marketing programs happening over the course of the next year. And that's really just going to be because ultimately a lot of those gated programs, at least that we see for a lot of B2B SaaS companies, again, it's not true for every single industry. It really depends on who you're marketing to. But we're seeing is people are generally not wanting to go through the gated process. There's so much access to free content out there right now that people don't want to provide the information. And they've been probably burned in the past by having sales be a little too aggressive in the past about trying to generate a lead off of it. So I think we're going to see a lot more investment in brand marketing. And then the third thing is that I think there's also going to be a movement from an attribution perspective. Attribution will always remain important. We're always going to want to know what channels are important and which channels are driving revenue. But I think that there's going to be a moving acceptance where we say, hey, listen, let's look at the aggregate funnel and understand in general, like, are we moving the core three metrics, which predominantly for most B2B SaaS marketers, it's inbound demo requests, it's marketing source pipeline, like we just talked about, and marketing source revenue. And I think that those three, if we see increasing amounts and we're meeting our targets, people aren't going to complain too much about, which channel it came from. They're going to be happy, and I think it's the moments where you don't hit your number, and then everyone says, all right, well, which channel was it? What do we need to turn off, and what do we need to increase? And I think those moments happen, but over time, I think that's going to start to move. So those are probably the biggest three that we see. So.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah. So we'll see how it all pans out. Hopefully I'm right. I mean, some of these things are already kind of happening, but I think that there's still so many marketing teams that are not executing on some of this stuff, and certainly other people saying stuff. But
Yeah,
anyway,
no,
well, it's
I
awesome.
agree.
Pleasure finally talking after all this time on LinkedIn, and I'm gonna have to figure out what this episode sounds like with Luna on the call. So everyone who's listening to this will have to just bear with it. But anyway, I'm gonna have to put her in her crate maybe next time. But anyway, no, thanks for jumping on, and until the next time.
Yeah, likewise. Really nice to talk, and yeah, talk to you soon.
All right, thanks.